Masechet Ketubot, Daf Dalid. We're going to discuss a really interesting case of when we're preparing a wedding, and just as everything is ready, a parent of the groom or a parent of the bride dies. And now we have a question, what should we do? Should we push off the wedding? We do that in some cases till after the Shiv'ah, after the morning. But in some cases, as we will see, we perform the wedding anyway and delay the burial. And we celebrate 7 days for the wedding, and afterwards we do 7 days of mourning. So this is very, very interesting. The context is that we saw a baraita. There was actually a Tosefta that said that if there's ones, generally we want to get married on Wednesday, and on Monday is not allowed unless there's ones, unless there's a case of duress. So it would be asked, what is a case of duress? What is it talking about? We already saw one option. It is when some troops are coming to town and they're going to want to come and stay, and we're going to have to feed them. They're going to see this nice wedding ceremony all set up, and they're going to take all the food, and so therefore we can make the wedding earlier than usual, make it on Monday instead of a Wednesday, so that we can enjoy the wedding celebration, all the food, and the troops don't take it. That was one option. So now this is a second answer to what does it mean, honest, that we can make the wedding predated to Monday. So what does it mean? A case of duress, as following Braita will explain. If you had everything ready, the bread was already baked, the animal was slaughtered, the wine was already mixed and diluted, and at that point, it'll go bad if you leave it for a long time. The wine is good when it's in the casket, but it's already poured, it's already mixed. And just then, as everything is ready for the seudah, either the father of the groom or the mother of the bride dies. We're going to see that specifically those parents and not the other way around for a good reason. So now what should we do? If we do the burial first, well, you can't get married during the 7 days of mourning, and then all this food will ruin. So we don't delay the wedding. We take the body of the deceased and we put it in a separate room and we ignore it. Usually we want to bury right away, but in this case there's an overriding concern, and so we leave the body in one room and we bring the bride and groom into their wedding canopy and they get married. And we do the ceremony and they celebrate u'bo'ed be'ilat misvah u'foresh. And they can even have the first bi'ah, because that's a bi'at mitzvah. In order to consummate the marriage, they probably did the kiddushin way before, but they'll do the nisu'in and the sheva berachot, and they'll eat the cake and everything. And then that bi'ah is a mitzvah, because then the marriage is final, and then that's it. They can't be together again, because before the burial, he's an onen, or she, whatever, and afterwards they're going to be an avel. So we'll make an exception for the bi'at mitzvah, but not for further bi'ah is prohibited. And then, so in other words, they'll make the wedding, they'll do the first bi'ah, then afterwards they will bury the parent, and then they continue like it's Yom Tov, and they celebrate for 7 days, Sheva Berachot, Ve'achar kach noheg Shiv'at Yemei Avelut. And then, after that's done, we have 7 days of mourning. This is similar to if someone loses a relative during the holiday, during a Yom Tov, so they wait. Even if the burial happens on Yom Tov or on Chol HaMoed, they don't start their Avelut until after the holiday finishes. And this is a holiday for the bride and groom. And during that time, even though they did a first bi'ah, but they're not allowed to do bi'ah again, and so therefore they should sleep separately. He will sleep in the men's quarters, and she will sleep in the women's quarters, so that they don't have bi'ah again as a precaution. And even though after the 7 days of happiness they're going to have 7 days of mourning, the bride is allowed to, and should, we do not withhold the jewelry from her. She should look nice. She should look like a bride for all those 30 days for her husband. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. If everything was all laid out. Now, if not, it's, let's say, a regular case where they did not start preparing the food and everything was not ready, and then a parent dies. In that case, we would in fact delay the wedding and have the burial and 7 days of mourning first, and then do the wedding after. But here they're going to lose out on this whole seudah, and so let's say they're preparing everything on Monday, and the parent dies, so then they will do the wedding right away on Monday, and not wait till Wednesday. That's the case of ones. Okay, so we're going to be discussing this case a lot, and we have a couple of limitations on the case where it does not apply. V'davka aviv shel hatan or imah shel kala, and it only applies. We only make the wedding first and delay the burial and delay the mourning when it's the father of the groom and the mother of the bride. Because there's no one else that will busy themselves. Specifically, the father of the groom, he's the one that paid for and set up all the food and everything for the wedding. And the mother of the bride, she's the one that helps the bride with her dress and jewelry and makeup. And so if they're the ones that pass away, there's no one else that can fulfill that job. And so we couldn't do it again. But if it was the mother of the groom or the father of the bride, they just kind of show up. So we could delay the wedding. And it's okay because we could recreate whatever the father of the groom and the mother of the bride had already done. We can do that again. But if they die, then there's no way. So we have to take advantage of the work that they did immediately and do the wedding immediately. Okay, so that's one limitation. Amadav Rafam bar Papa amadav Chista lo shanu ela shenatan mayim al gabe basar aval lo natan mayim al gabe basar mizdaban. A further limitation of Rav Chista. It says this law is true only when they did not yet put water on the meat. They do shechita on an animal and then it'll stay a while, but when they're ready to cook it, they wash the meat. And once you wash it, then it will spoil more quickly. So if they already put the water on the meat and then it's going to spoil quickly, in that case, yes, and it's also the conditions above, that's the father of the groom or the mother of the bride, then we will make the wedding immediately and delay the burial. But if they did not yet put water on the meat, then it can be sold, right? So, okay, you killed an animal or a few animals, depending on how big the wedding is, and so you're ready to do it, but now there's a death. All right, so take the meat to the marketplace and you won't lose out a lot of money, and then you'll take that money and then you'll wait a week and buy more meat next week. So there's not a big financial loss. So it's interesting how much the rabbis take into account that significant financial loss, which is certainly true even today. Amar Rava. Bichrach afal pi shenatan mayim al gabe basar mizdeban. Rava puts a limitation on what Rav Chista says. And if it's a big city where there's a lot of people in a big marketplace, then even if you put water, even if you wash the meat, you can still sell it because there's so many people, you can find someone that will buy it and will use it immediately and it won't spoil. So in that case also you can delay the wedding. Amar Papa, they're looking for reasons to delay the wedding because there is a tension between these two values. On the one hand, you want to have a wedding and don't want to lose out money. On the other hand, you want to respect the deceased and have the burial right away and be able to mourn properly. And so if it's possible without losing too much money, then we would like to do the burial immediately. Amar Papa ubichvar afal pi shelo natan mayim al gabe basar lo mizdaban. The Papa says the opposite limitation. If it's a small village, there's very few people, maybe not even enough people to eat the whole animal. And so in that case, even if you did not put water on the meat yet, it cannot be sold. You can't find buyers for all of the meat that they prepared. So in that case, because you have all this meat prepared, even if it wasn't washed, it'll cause a significant loss of money, and therefore there's no one to buy it. So therefore, do the wedding right away. Okay, now we have a question. If you add Rava and put Rav Papa together, so then if it's a big city, it can be sold even if it's washed. If it's a small city, then it cannot be sold even if it's not washed. So when Rav Chista said it depends if it's washed or not, what case was he talking about? He's talking about a place like the city of Mata Mechasya, was his city, which is smaller than a big city, but bigger than a small city, bigger than a village. And so an in-between city, that's what Rav Chisda was talking about. Good. Tanya Kevated Rav Chisda. And now we're going to bring a braita. We're going to be focusing on this braita a lot. So let's look at it carefully. And I want to label it. This is the braita that supports Rav Chisda. As we'll see. If they were preparing the meal, and they were preparing a couple of days before Wednesday, and they already baked the bread, and they killed the animals, and they mixed the wine. So this is the same as what we had previously, except it adds a line, and they washed the meat. See, only if they washed the meat, then we do the wedding right away and delay the burial. So that's why it supports Rav Chisda. Okay, the rest of it is very similar to the previous braita, but this braita adds a few more things that we're going to analyze. Umet aviv shel chatan o ima shel kala, either the father of the groom or the mother of the bride, specifically them. Machnisin et hamet lecheder v'et hachatan v'et hakala lechupa. We leave the dead body in one room on the side till afterwards, and then we bring the bride and groom to the wedding canopy, and they have the first bi'ah, because that's a mitzvah to finish off the wedding. And then he separates. And they celebrate the 7 days of wedding celebration. And afterwards, they switch modes and they go into mourning. Each one has to be separate. You can't be happy and sad at the same time. They have to kind of push off their feelings of sadness for 7 days and focus on the happiness. And then they'll push off the happy feelings for 7 days and focus on the sadness. Each event deserves its own attention. And all during that time, both during the feasting and the mourning, they have to sleep separately. So in other words, even though they're happy together and they're having wine and celebrating with their friends, in private they are still going to practice the mourning practices. And even though they did bi'ah already, now they have to separate. And in order to, as a gezerah, in order to make sure that they won't be together, they even sleep in separate quarters. The Braita continues. This is the Braita supporting Rav Chisda. V'chen mi shepersa ishto nida, hu yashen banashim v'hi yeshana ben hanashim. If you have a chupat nida, if the bride is a nida on her wedding day, which happens sometimes, then they'll have the Sheva Berachot, but then they don't go back to a hotel room together. He sleeps with the men and she sleeps with the woman because they're not allowed to be together. Okay. It's not like a case where a couple's married already and they've already been together. Then, obviously, like all married couples, even when she's nidah, they sleep in the same room together. We don't worry about that. But here, they never had bi'ah yet, so their desire for each other is bigger, and so we want to make sure as a gezerah that they won't be together, so they sleep separately. And also here, even though she's in mourning, we make sure that she has her jewelry for all those 30 days. This goes back to the mourning case. Okay, ben kach o ben kach lo yib'o lo be'erev Shabbat lo be'mosei Shabbat. In any of these cases above, we make sure that the first bi'ah that they have should not be on Friday night and not on Saturday night. Friday night we already saw, because then she's going to be bleeding and you're causing a chabura, you're causing an injury, and that's a deoraita melacha. You're not allowed to cause an injury that will cause bleeding on Shabbat. Saturday night, it's not clear why. We're going to answer that on the next stuff. Okay, so that's the braita. So let's analyze it. Amar mor hu yashen ben hanashim vehi yeshena ben hanashim. Mesayeh Rabbi Yochanan. This braita says that they sleep in separate quarters. You know what? This supports Rabbi Yochanan. They sleep in separate quarters even during the 7 days of happiness. Rabbi Yochanan, we saw this back in Moed Katan, where he said that even though we do not practice avelut on a holiday, if someone loses a relative on a Yom Tov, so they do not start their avelut. Nevertheless, matters that are in private, that's about public things, but matters that are in private, they do continue. And so therefore, being intimate with one's spouse is a private thing, and so they continue not doing that. Same would apply on Shabbat. There's always a Shabbat during Avelut, and on Shabbat also, person publicly will go to Beit Knesset, wear regular clothes and all that, but in private will not be able to be with his wife. And so here, this is the same thing. The 7 days of Mishteh for a wedding are the couple's personal Yom Tov. And so even though they're enjoying and they don't start Avelut till afterwards, nevertheless, they have to separate from each other. Good. Now, Darash Rav Yosef Bered Rava Mishmeh de Rava. Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, lectured, taught in the name of his father Rava. Lo shanu ela shelo Baal. Aval Baal ishto yeshena imo. He said this halacha that they have to be separate in separate quarters. That's only if they. This is regarding a nidah. As only applies when they did not have their first bi'ah yet, because then their desire for each other is great. But if they already had a first bi'ah, and then she becomes a nidah afterwards, then they can sleep together in the same room. I guess at that point, their initial desire, they've been waiting, during their dating, and they've been shomer negi'ah, so they can't wait for the first night. So if she's nidah the first night, they have to separate. But once they're together once, so then they'll be able to control themselves, and she'll be clean in another few days. And so then it goes to the normal pattern where they can sleep together in the same room. Okay. V'hahacha de beba'al askinan v'katane hu yashen ben hanashim v'hi yashena ben hanashim. Hold on. This doesn't make sense because the Braita that we're discussing, the Braita that supported of Chisda, it compared two cases. The case of chupat nida together with the case of a person the bride and groom who loses a parent, where they do the wedding ceremony first, and they consummate with Baal Askinan, where they do Bi'ah, the first Bi'ah already. And nevertheless, it says that after the first Bi'ah, they do the burial and they sleep separately during all 7 days of feasting and all 7 days of mourning. And so how could Rava say that it's talking about when he didn't do Bi'ah yet? But if he did bi'ah, they can be together. But obviously, our baraita is talking about a case where they did bi'ah, because that's what it says specifically in the morning case. So we answer, Ki kamad apirsa ishto nida. When Rava said this, he was only talking about the sefa of the baraita, the case where she becomes a nida, and it says they have to sleep separately. So he's noting that's only if they never had bi'ah, they then have to sleep in separate quarters. But they had one bi'ah, then they can sleep in the same room even when she's nidah. But that doesn't fit the word so well, because it says v'ha v'chen katane. In the Braita, first it talks about the case of mourning, and then it says and also. And if it says on also, doesn't that mean that it's saying they are the same law? No, maybe not. Hachi kamad v'chen mi shepersa ishto nidah velo ba'al. They're not exactly the same. It's saying that when you have an avel where they have the first bi'ah and afterwards, even though they had the first bi'ah, then they have to go to separate quarters. And so too a nidah, if they did not have bi'ah yet, then that's the same as an avel who did have the first bi'ah. So to a nidah that did not have bi'ah yet, they have to sleep in separate quarters, but otherwise they could. All right, so we answered the textual question, but now we want to go conceptual. Are you telling me, lememrad avelut kila le minida? This line doesn't translate well. It kind of means the opposite of the way that it literally translates. What it means is that, are you trying to tell me that avelut is treated more lightly by people? And since most people will treat avelut lightly, and they'll end up being together with their wives, we, the rabbis, have to be machmir. And so, regarding avelut, even though they were together once, we have to be machmir, because people will treat avelut, it's only the Rabbanan, people will treat it lightly. We have to say, even though you were together once, you still have to sleep in separate quarters. Whereas nidah, which is doraita, is more serious. People will automatically take it seriously, and the rabbis can be lenient and say, okay, you can sleep together. So is that true that avelut, we're going to impose stricter laws than regarding a nidah? But that doesn't make sense, because now we have a second statement, Bar Havuna and a Braita. ואמר רבי יצחק בר חנינא אמר רב הונא כל מלאכות שאישה עושה לבעלה נידה עושה לבעלה חוץ ממזיגת הכוס ועשת המיטה והרחסת פניו ידיו ורגליו. Regarding nida, it says all the services that a wife usually does for her husband, when she's nida, she can continue doing for her husband, except for like I don't know, cooking or whatever, except for pouring and mixing his wine, making his bed, and washing his hands and feet. Those three actions are particularly intimate and may lead to them having intimacy together. And so therefore when she's nida, this is one of the hadchakot, don't do these three things. So we see that regarding nida, we're machmir regard and to keep them separate. Tanya, but now it comes to when one spouse is in mourning, we teach, even though the rabbis did say that a person cannot force his wife, let's say when she's in mourning, to put on makeup, to put on a paint on her eyes or rouge on her face, because let's say she's in mourning, she's sad, she doesn't feel like putting on makeup. So usually during the rest of the year, the husband can say, I want you to look nice. But when she's in mourning, and she doesn't have to put on makeup. So even though that's true, but nevertheless, be'emet amru mozeget lo akos, masad lo mita, umarcheset lo panav yadav v'raglav. When let's say when one of the couple is in mourning, she can mix his wine and she can make the bed and she can wash his hands, face, and feet. So what you see here is that regarding the laws of nida, we do a more stringent separation between the husband and wife, and more lenient in the case of mourning. And so this contradicts what you said before, where the law there was that in case of mourning, we are more stringent and say even though they had bi'ah once, nevertheless they have to sleep in separate quarters. Where nida, as long as they had bi'ah once, they can sleep in the same quarters. So how can we reconcile these two baraitot, the baraita that supported Rav Chisda we saw before, and this baraita here that's brought with Rav Huna that says the opposite? Okay, this is going to be the main question. We're going to see two answers. The first one is anonymous. The second one is all the way at the end of the daf, is by Rav Asher. So here's answer number one. La kashya kan ba'avelut tideh, kan ba'avelut tidaha. It depends who is in mourning, the husband or the wife. If it's the husband who lost a parent, and if he's the one in mourning, that's when the sages are more stringent. And they say, even if you had bi'ah, you have to sleep apart. Because even though he's in mourning and he's sad, that's not going to stop his desire for his wife. And so therefore, you know what? You have to be extra careful. So separate. So that's more restrictive than a case of nida. Whereas this baraita here that says that she can do all the things for him, unlike nida, that's talking about when she is the one that lost a parent. When she lost a parent, then we're not afraid because she's in mourning and she's sad. She's going to refrain and she's not going to have desire to be with him. And so she'll make sure that they're not together. So in that case, they would be allowed to sleep in the same room, and she can serve him, and we don't worry about it. And so this is how we reconcile the two sources. In fact, it depends. If it's his loss, then mourning is more stringent. If it's her loss, then mourning is less stringent than nida. Okay, now we ask, V'ha'aviv shel chatan o imah shel kala katane. Hold on, that baraita that we brought to support Rav Chisda mentioned either the father of the groom or the mother of the bride died. So that includes the mother of the bride. And so that means she is in mourning. And yet it still says that they would need to separate. So even if she's in mourning. So we answer, Ki katane ash'ara. That baraita, when it said the mother of the bride, that was talking about all the rest of the items in that baraita. The fact that we delay the wedding for her, but regarding specifically the fact that they have to separate and sleep in different quarters, that only applied to the father of the groom dying. Okay, so that's possible reading. And now we ask, this whole entire answer is based on an understanding that when he is in mourning, we're more strict than when she is in mourning. But this is a problem from now a third baraita that we're going to bring. If a man lost his father-in-law or mother-in-law, meaning the wife is in mourning, he cannot force her to put on makeup. She's not in the mood to put it on. That's fine. She has a right not to put it on. In fact, the opposite. They will turn over the bed. We saw that this is a custom of mourning they would do back then. We do something similar, like with pillows on the floor, but our beds are made differently, so we don't do this part of the bed anymore. But they used to turn over their beds and sleep on the opposite side of the bed. And he will practice along with her avelut. This is also something that we still do a little bit today. The custom here in the community is if one's parent, for example, is sitting shiv'ah, then the children also will not go to parties, and will lower their happiness. In those days, it sounds like the at least the spouse and maybe other relatives also would actually be with them and even sit on the floor and practice mourning together with the person who's avel. And then it continues the Baraita and says, "V'chen hi shemet chamiha o chamota." If the wife lost her father-in-law or mother-in-law, meaning that the husband is in mourning, she is not permitted to put on makeup. She shouldn't look nice for her husband because they're not permitted to each other. Rather, they turn over their bed and she will sit with him and practice mourning. Now, when it says nohaget imo, it sounds like they're going to be together and they're going to be sleeping in the same room on the same bed, right? Overturned bed, but they are sleeping in the same room and they don't have to separate. And it says it here explicitly, both if she is in mourning and if he is in mourning. So you see, this is a problem. You can't really make a distinction between him and her and say if he's the one in mourning, then we're more strict and have to separate. When she's in mourning, then you don't. Okay, so we answer Taneh, you know what? Reread the Braita with a couple of more words. Bavelut dide, regarding when she is in mourning, the first case. Add in words, Hu yashen ben hanashim, v'ishto yashana ben hanashim. Sorry, when he is in mourning. And then add in the words, and they also have to sleep together. They have to sleep apart. Okay, so we're adding in words to the Braita. Hold on. Veha v'chen katani, but it says v'chen, meaning it's the same. That's giving an equal sign that everything is the same, whether he is in mourning or she is in mourning. No, we answer ki katane akichul va'pirkus. No, the equal sign, the same, is just saying they're equated regarding makeup. In that case, she does not put on makeup no matter who's in mourning. But regarding sleeping in the same room or not, if he is the one that's in mourning, they don't sleep in the same room. Hold on. It says with him, which sounds like they are, in fact, sleeping together on the same bed, right? My love, imo b'mita. Lo imo b'bayit. No, imo could just mean that they're in the same house. And there's other people that also live in the house, and he will sleep with the men in the house, and she will sleep with the women who also live in the house. And in fact, we have support for this. Uchdamar le rav lechia bere be'apa nehoga beluta. Delo be'apa lo tinhoga beluta. Rav Chia told his son that when someone is observing mourning practices and they are in front of her, let's say when someone dies, and you are a relative, and so when you're in front of them in their presence, then you also behave with mourning practices. But when you're not in front of them, if you go out in the street, then you don't have to practice avelut. So what you see here is that the word imo means physically together in the same house and not together in the same bed. And so this baraita is not a problem, and we've solved all the problems. Okay, that's the end of answer 1, right? So again, answer 1, what's the deal? What's more stringent, nida or avelut? We saw it depends on who is the one in mourning. If it's a husband who's in mourning, then we don't trust the husband, and they, even after they had bi'ah once, they have to separate and live in different quarters. That's more stringent than the case of nida, where they don't have to separate if they had bi'ah once. But where she is the one that's in mourning, when she's sad, she's not going to be in the mood, and therefore they can be together after the first bi'ah. In the morning, they have a first bi'ah, and that is more lenient. Not only that, she can even serve him, make his bed, which you couldn't do in Nida. Good. So everything works out in the first opinion. And now we have a second answer. Rav Asher Amar, Mi kam damet aveluta dehacha l'aveluta de'alma. You're comparing this case of avelut to a general case of avelut. The first baraita, of the one that supported Rav Chisda, that was talking about a case of avelut where we pushed off the burial and pushed off the avelut to a second week. In that case, people may treat it lightly. In that case, we have to be machmir and say, you know what, sleep in separate quarters. But in the usual case, not talking about a wedding, and the second braita, the one that we brought with Rav Huna, and the braita, the third braita we brought right above, that was talking about just a regular case on any day, not connected to a wedding. If someone is an avel, then they're going to take it seriously, right? Because they're not pushing it off for any reason, and they can continue sleeping in the same room, and you don't have to worry about it. And so this is an easier way to solve the problem. Aveluta da'alma, a general case of someone who's avel hamir. People will treat it stringently. And people are not going to take it lightly, and therefore we can let them sleep in the same room. Aveluta dehacha, kevan da'akil rabbanan atel. But in this case, where we had the wedding first, because the rabbis were lenient, the people may come and say, oh, it's pushed off already. Like a fast day that's pushed off. It was more lenient, even if you're not so sick. And so people will come to treat it lightly. And then only in that case, the rabbis came and said, you know what? You have to sleep in separate rooms. Okay, now we just clarify one more point. My kula, in what way are the rabbis lenient in this case more than in other cases? If it's the fact that he can do bi'ah, the first bi'ah, the bi'at mitzvah, and then he separates, oh, well, that's only, see, usually someone who's an avel is not allowed to be together. But in this case, they didn't bury yet, right? This is the order that they would do. They're preparing the meal. Someone dies. They do the wedding first. And then they first bi'ah, and only then they do the burial. And the person does not become an avel until after the burial. And only then the prohibition of the husband and wife being together kicks in. Now, when exactly does it kick in is a machloket. Either be Eliezer had sheyaseh mipetach habayit, either be Yoshua sheyaseh magol. Eliezer starts earlier, as soon as the dead body leaves the entrance of the house, because most people will stay behind. A few people will go and take the body into, to the cemetery, which was out of town, out in the field. So as soon as it leaves, like today, if we send the body to Israel, the avelut starts immediately when it leaves. According to the Yoshua, no, until it's buried and we close up the golel, is the round stone that covers the cave, until we complete the burial ceremony. That's when avelut actually starts. Okay, but either way, it doesn't matter. The point is that here he's doing the bi'at mitzvah before either of these stages, and so therefore that's not really such a kula. Now, it is a little bit of a kula because onen, that's the status of a person before the burial, after the death of a relative. Onen also is not allowed to be with his wife, but the onen prohibition is more lenient, and so that's not such a big deal that the rabbis would allow it. And so anyway, the bi'ah itself is not going to be something that is such a leniency that the people then will take the mourning not seriously, because really he did that before the avelut started. Rather, the leniency in this special case is that first they're having 7 days of feasting and happiness, of wedding celebration, and then they're pushing off the mourning till afterwards. So, usually someone who loses a relative, they're much sadder in the first week, already pushed it off. So this is like the dahui, and so people will say it's not as serious in the second week over there. And then they may come, if you let them sleep in the same room together, they may come to bi'ah together. And so only in this case do we separate them, even though they had the first bi'ah. That's when it's more machmir than the nidah. But a usual case of mourning, they can sleep they can in fact sleep in the same room. And so this is the second answer that solves all the problems. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.